Well, hello again. Thank you so much for taking time to be with me here today.
My
Can you
pleasure.
introduce yourself and your job title?
My name is Susanne Friend. I'm a painting conservator. I own my own business, Conservator Associates, in Los Angeles, California, and I've been in private practice since 1990.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Could you talk a little bit about how you got into the field and what sparked your interest in painting conservation?
It is a fun story. I got
Well,
interested. I got interested in conservation through a next door neighbor who was a temporary neighbor because the people in my parents' neighborhood were a lot of foreign service people. This was in Washington, D.C. So there were a lot of people bouncing around, and our neighbors would rent out their house. And the person that they rented to was a paper conservator at the Smithsonian. And we used to chat over the fence. I was 17 at the time. And she got me interested, and she brought me in and gave me tours and introduced me to a bunch of people, including a painting conservator in private practice in Washington, who I ended up doing a very, very basic internship because I was super young and I wasn't really sure. And then I went to college, and when I studied art history in college and became more interested in conservation, also because I grew up in Rome and Paris.
wow.
And especially in Rome, you cannot help but stub your toe on something that has existed for several thousand years, and you are seeing decay in its glory all around you. And I mean, there's so much art and beauty and things that are falling apart, and you kind of don't notice that. But in light of what was exposed to later, I started thinking about that, and I also started thinking about trying to study in Italy. And so when I graduated from Vassar, there was a scholarship for international study. And I managed to kind of wheedle my way into a 1 year uh, study program at the Istituto Centrale di Restauro in Rome. And there I met Paolo and Laura Mora, who were the king and queen of conservation at the time in Italy, and who took me under their wing. And I learned a lot about Italian conservation practices, and worked on wall paintings, traveled all over Italy, and it was fantastic. And in the end, they said, Susie, go home and study in America because this is not good for you. And so I did. And I came back here and I got my chemistries, and then applied to grad school and ended up at Queen's in Canada. And then I did a summer internship at the National Gallery in Washington. And then the only thing that was available to me for a year-long fellowship was at LACMA. And so I applied and came to LA, and the rest is history.
That's an amazing story.
That's the short version. There's a lot more in there.
I bet. Yeah. No, it's amazing though that you got that exposure to it so young. Because
Well, I always knew I was interested in art, because
yeah,
partly because of the way I grew up, and partly because of my parents were incredibly encouraging, dragged us to every church, every castle, every museum, everywhere. I mean, it was I had great parents. They helped a lot in that respect.
that's wonderful. My mother always says that she regrets she didn't raise us Catholic only because of all the art and culture that we
The
weren't
only reason to be
exposed to.
Catholic.
Yes. Um,
Catholics have all the best music, architecture, art, for sure.
yep, everything except for the religion that I'm a little. But
That's for another podcast.
um, well, great. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about your educational journey, but I would love to hear more about your studies, both within school and then outside of during those internships and fellowships, and really like how they prepared you. what you learned and how they best prepared you slash didn't prepare you for your career?
That's a good question. Um, so I started when I was in Rome. I was convincing myself I was going to do the 3-year program at the Istituto. And the Moras convinced me that it was not a good idea. And so when I came back here, I threw myself into getting all of my requirements to get into the grad schools here. And I realized very quickly that each grad school has its own personality and its own flavor, and that where you go to school matters to some degree for in terms of how you are perceived when you leave. Like there's always one grad school that is on the top of the wheel of fortune at the time. You know, it's just the way it is. And I think at the time that I was applying to, it was Cooperstown, which is now Buffalo, and currently it's Winter Tour. And I know Queens has gone through its ups and downs. And I had convinced myself that I wanted to go to NYU, and because I wanted to be in New York City, because I wanted a New York experience. I was 24, 25. I was like, I'm going to New York. And when I went for my interview, everything about it screamed, no, this is not the place for you. And I was so depressed. I dragged myself over to the Frick and wandered around the Frick looking at, it was one of my favorite museums in the world. And I just was like, okay, this is not going to work. And then I went and interviewed at Queens, and everything about Queens was, this is the place for you. And, you know, those decisions, those are turning points. The way your career proceeds and who you meet and where you end up. And, you know, you can't possibly predict any of that stuff. And I would argue against overthinking it, because it's,
Yeah.
it is what it is. So I went to Queens, which I absolutely loved. It's a beautiful place to be. So aesthetically, which was very important to me. Of course, New York is stunning too, but for different reasons. This was just much more peaceful nature. The building is on the Lake Ontario at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. It's incredible. And
Beautiful.
the Kingston is a very pretty town too. And I was lucky. I've been very lucky, Isabella. And in all of I seem to kind of fall into things at the right place at the right time. And Queens at that time had its 2 principal professors who were kind of its founders, and really spectacular people, Ian Hodkinson and Henry Hodges. And Henry Hodges was the archaeological artifacts person, and Ian Hodkinson was the paintings person. And Ian is larger than life. He's a cross between Santa Claus and Karl Marx, and he's just a fantastic professor, and made a big difference in all of our education, as well as the way we approach things frankly, on the level of which you are not taught in grad school, because you're busy being taught how to conserve things. But one of the more interesting aspects that is not taught, and I think this touches on one of the questions in your list, is that how you deal with people. And I think Ian taught this indirectly, and I won't go any more into that. But if you have to learn how to deal with curators if you're in a museum, and registrars, and all the people who handle art, and all, you know, the intricacies of the museum world is something that you don't learn, and you're thrown into, and, you know, obviously that's how you're expected to learn. But from a more difficult perspective, if you go into private practice, you are really at sea. You don't learn estimating, you don't learn, you know, you've got to figure out time management, dealing with your clients. You have to learn psychology. You have to learn how to talk to people, how to present your case, how to quell their fears and their, you know, you can't sound too technical because they don't understand, and then that makes them feel uncomfortable and suspicious. I mean, you don't know. You just have to suss people out. And so all of that is something that I have learned, and I'm still learning because I still make plenty of mistakes. But I'm at the point now where I can tell on the phone
Yeah.
how to deal with somebody. But all that stuff is something that is woefully lacking, and I think is kind of being addressed to some degree in by AIC in various ways that they've gotten a lot better with that. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I diverged from your answering your question, so you can lead
Yeah.
me back if you want.
That was great. um, let's see. Um, yeah, actually, I mean, you mentioned that like uh deciding to go to Queens was kind of like one of those pivotal moments, and I think I asked on my list about if you have any other like moments that stand out to you from not just your education but throughout your career, uh be it through really cool projects that really shaped your ideas about conservation, or just yeah, anything that stands
So
out.
many cool projects. So many cool projects. I don't know where to begin. I mean, I guess I can talk about something that's happening right now, which also covers part of another question you asked about collaboration, because
Perfect.
this was in particular one of the first times that I've really collaborated on an equal footing with a colleague and worked together. We were asked to deinstall in 2018 an oversize, basically a mural by Roy Lichtenstein,
Hmm.
which was created custom for the Artists Building for Michael Ovitz in Beverly Hills. And this painting was sort of a scaled up version of the Bauhaus stairway that Lichtenstein had done. It's an Oscar Schlemmer painting, and Lichtenstein had done a version in, I think, 1989, and then he was asked to do this scaled up version. It's about 28 feet by 17 feet,
Wow.
and it was created to hang in the atrium of the new building, and to be site specific, as one might expect for something that big. And so when we were asked to take it down, we had a lot of questions for the engineers of the building, and doing some research into original, architectural plans and drawings for how this thing was installed. And everybody assured us that the way that it had been installed was meant to be reversible, because that is the watchword of conservation. And so we said, great, that's wonderful. Big
Wasn't so
pause. Big
reversible.
pause. Not so reversible. So the painting is on two pieces of cotton duck that are butt joined down the center and mounted onto, our engineers told us, layer of sunbrella, which is a synthetic material that was meant to be the interleaf in between the painting and the support, which was a build out of steel frame and drywall. So they built it to look like it was a painting hanging on the wall, except it was a 3-inch deep structure of drywall mounted on metal,
Yeah.
studs, basically. And then there were tacking margins that were turned over the side and glued down. But what they told us was that we could take these two pieces of cotton duck that were painted on as a single piece. So there was paint going over the joint,
Yeah.
because we had this umbrella behind it, and so we could take it off as a unit. So we set up this very elaborate, beautiful system to take this down, and this is where the collaboration comes in, and I'll touch on that in a second. But we set up our scissor lifts to get up the top, because the bottom of the painting was at 9 feet.
Oh
So
wow.
it was
Yeah.
very high up. It's quite fun. You deal with mural paintings, you cannot be afraid of heights. And we get up there and we peel back the top tacking margin. And, this is tacking margin in painting conservation speak. And it was just turned over and glued to the top of this giant box.
Mhm.
And we see from looking at the umbrella underneath that it's actually 5 skinny pieces, butt joined to each other and glued to
Oh
the
no.
drywall. And the kicker is, because it wouldn't be so bad, but the kicker is that the butt joint of the central piece of Sombrella exactly aligned with the butt joint of the 2 pieces of cotton duck.
Of
So
course.
to take it off, the thing would split. So we devised a way, and I know I'll get to the collaboration bit. So uh, I started off in private practice with my then husband, who I met in grad school. And we came out to LA to start a private practice together, and we separated our business and our marriage in 2014. And he was the one who was, he was, mad inventor type, crazy, brilliant, extremely good at problem solving, any kind of engineer, seismic, architectural, and he'd come up with a solution. So he was the one who would have figured out how to take this down in a way that was safe and fun. But I didn't have him and I didn't want to call on him. So I called on another conservator and to collaborate. And that conservator is Annetta Zabala, Conservation here in Los Angeles. And she has 2 engineers on her team, and they built the most fantastic structure to take this down. And a lot of this, I gave a talk on this already. The painting itself is in New York right now. So if you want to go roll over to Gagosian in Chelsea, you can take a look at it. And actually we'll be there in June to take it down. So you can come by when we're there.
Oh, wonderful. I don't know if I'll still be in New York after graduation. Rent's a little expensive for a college
Yeah, I hear you.
grad.
Anyway, we figured out together a way, and it was extremely bold and super fun. And Annetta and her team set up winches
Mhm.
on either side of the painting that held a pole that went through a big sonotube, and the sonotube hung just below the top edge of the painting. And then we used a modified machete to go between to split the drywall paper
Yeah.
so that when the machete went between, and I know this from other projects I've done, that drywall paper splits very easily, and that you can use that property to take apart and keep the rest of the painting safe because you've got layers attached.
Yeah.
And we knew that the adhesive that was attaching the umbrella to the drywall and the painting to the umbrella were both the same, the Velasco. And so we knew we could separate the drywall paper and it would come away with part drywall paper, adhesive, canvas, drywall paper, adhesive, canvas adhesive, or umbrella adhesive painting. And we would be able to take that down and all along the width of the painting, so 17 feet or 18 feet, it was 18 feet because it was 2 pieces of 9-foot wide cotton duck, and then drape it over the top of this sonotube, and then work on the back to remove all the adhesive and the paper. And of course, there were bits of plaster because the seams of the drywall and where they had put the screws in were all plastered over and made smooth to attach this umbrella to. And so we did all of that in the air and then continued to drape the painting over the top. And at the bottom of it was another sonotube where the painting got rolled up as once we got to that level. So that's in a nutshell how we removed it. And very great collaboration with Annetta and her team. And and it was so much fun. I mean, if you want to be a conservator, one of your personal attributes must be you like to pick. You like to pick and you like to peel. And so this satisfied all those things.
Wonderful. And you must like heights.
Well, yeah, if you're doing large scale stuff, whether you're going into objects or monuments or whatever, yeah, no
Yeah.
fear. And then the painting went into storage, and we assumed it would be sold to some emirate in faraway places with a gigantic wall,
Hmm.
and it didn't. It stayed in storage, and then the owner arranged to have it on display in New York. And so last August, we went and installed it, adhered it to a gigantic panel, which was another fascinating story in itself. And they said it was going to be up for 6 weeks and we would come right back and take it down. And
Hmm.
then that turned into January, which turned into March, and then turned into June. So now we are finally going back to take it down. And hopefully that will be the last time this thing gets rolled. Because the other thing is that paintings, which are meant to be in a flat configuration, they suffer when you roll them. And
Yeah,
so,
of course.
and Lichtenstein in particular has his own issues because, like many of the artists at his time, they were doing similar things, making their own paint. Like he was using a lot of silver paint.
Hmm.
And what he did, the paint at the time was Magna Beaucourt. I have to double check on that, but as I recall. And he mixed aluminum powder in a bucket with the medium and just, stirred it up. So it's not what you would call a paint. It's not, pigment is not ground properly. It's not
Yeah.
bound properly. So those paints typically, and we did a lot of research on this prior to deinstalling it because we were
Hmm.
worried about that in particular, and they don't hold it up. They don't behave well
Yeah.
under tension and compression.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, I'm glad that it stayed up for a couple extra months because I'll definitely go check it out.
Good.
um, Lovely. Yeah, if we want to jump over into like sort of I guess more not necessarily more theoretical. But I think my next question is about what are some of like the most pressing issues or challenges you think conservators face today, either theoretical ethical challenges I've had people speak to me about, or like actual physical hands-on challenges.
I mean, in terms of everyday pressures, physical challenges, because of environmental issues and partly because of the way the world changed with the pandemic, materials availability
Mm-hmm.
has either become prohibitively expensive or just isn't there. And so the things that we were used to using, materials, are really hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
So that's, we will adapt to that. But I know a lot of people are, struggling to find the things they need to use to do the work they normally wouldn't have thought twice about. Um, and in terms of sustainability, certainly we use a lot of materials that, and this bothers me, all the plastic materials that are
Yeah.
used once and thrown away. And it also hurts to see how much in terms of shipping. This is another one of my pet peeves, is that you see this all the time when things are wrapped in polyethylene for shipping, and that polyethylene is used once and then discarded. And crates are built and destroyed, and some crate is custom, so trying to reuse it is difficult, and there's no storage space, so people junk those. So all of those things bother me a lot in terms of how much we waste and what that's doing to the planet.
Yeah.
Another material issue is getting a hold of decent quality stretchers for restretching paintings. I often use Upper Canada stretchers because they're reasonable and fast and listen to
Yeah.
custom requirements. And recently I had a request for a new stretcher for a very narrow, very tall painting.
Hmm.
And I didn't get a response to my quote. I got a phone call from them saying, we can't guarantee the quality that this won't warp or shrink or torque because the wood that we're getting is much poorer quality than 10 years ago because
Really?
it's all fast growth farmed wood, and it's just,
Yeah.
it
Wow.
doesn't make good quality stretchers. So that's another issue with, regarding the planet.
Yeah.
um
I had no idea I mean, yeah, that would even be an issue.
yeah,
Wow.
and materials in general so expensive
Yeah.
across the board.
Yeah. But
Buying solvents, stuff like that. And then, ethics, the bigger picture, that is a very huge topic. Um, do you have something specific you want to ask me about?
yeah, so something specific that I've kind of been asking everybody is if they have any thoughts on sort of the balance between preservation and restoration within conservation work. I've spoken to conservators who are very much, um, everybody obviously agrees that we should be minimally invasive wherever possible, reversible at all points. But I have spoken to people who've raised concerns about the emphasis on preventative conservation versus restorative conservation that has like arisen in recent years, and how newer conservators aren't being trained with some of the more invasive restorative techniques. And then I've also heard people on the other side of that who feel that it's not as big an issue, and then people in the middle who are like, I don't know, I'm just doing my work the way I know how.
I mean, the fact is that most of us got into conservation because we like doing stuff with our hands.
Yeah.
And of course, you want to do the best thing for the artwork
Hmm.
and the minimal requirement to keep it preserved for the future.
Yeah.
Um, if that means simply triage to keep it from, falling apart
Hmm.
and kicking the can further down, because that's often what that means, is that if you are not acting on something, or on the well, I'll give you an example. A client asks me to come and consolidate some flaking paint on a painting, and I see that it is flaking in 3 places, but I also see that it has been flaking and fixed several times in the past.
Hmm.
And this is just an ongoing condition. So I can either fix those 3 active flaking places, or I can say, let's try and do something more invasive to try and address the whole thing, or let's at least reverse the because maybe this was a bad restoration in the past, or several restorations, or materials were impinging upon it and causing other kinds of flaking. I mean, this is a really good example right behind me. This painting here
Hmm.
is an Elmer Wachtel from 1926, and we just finished it, and it
That's
had
beautiful.
yeah, it's lovely. It belongs to the Gardena High School Art Collection. Um, I don't know if you know about this tradition that many high schools had in the first part of the 20th century. The graduating classes would um, pool money and buy art and give it to them.
Oh,
And so this was really big from about 1910 to 1950, and before and after that too. I'm not really quite
no,
positive on history, but I
that's
have worked for many high school art
yeah.
collections with exceptional stuff in Southern California, and I know there were other places in the country that did this too. But this high school has one of the best collections, and this painting came in with about 25% missing.
Oh wow.
And just totally repainted on top of, directly on top of the losses, which, you can see because paint has dimension. And so if it flakes off and you just paint on top of the paint loss, you have a step from down from the original paint to the preparatory layer,
Yeah.
because that thickness of the original paint is missing. So you need to fill it. You need to apply a
Mhm.
filling layer of gesso of some kind, and you have to texture that gesso. And that is the most important part of in painting, is that your fill has to be the right texture, because no matter how well you match the color, if it's not the right texture, it's not going to look right. So that's just one of my favorite and most a big peeve. And so, it had tons and tons of flaking, and the
Mhm.
flaking was mostly old overpaint that was coming off. It
Ah,
wasn't original paint, but
yeah.
it was both, because really the reason for all of this paint loss was inherent vice, which
Mm.
is the conservation expression for maybe the artist did something wrong, or used the wrong materials, or somehow the error is built into the painting,
Yeah.
and the painting decays because of that. And so, this is one of those examples where you would never dream of consolidating and gluing back down the flaking overpaint, which is covered with a thick layer of yellow varnish. I mean, this painting is completely transformed, but at the same time, it's also 25% me.
Yeah.
So there are ethical questions embedded in all of that too. But I think I'm diverging as usual.
No, not at all. It's very interesting.
Yeah, so it is a big problem, and this question of reversibility is, I think, very honest, direct. Oh, I lost you. Oh, there you are.
Sorry. Just got a low battery warning.
Okay. Um, we all strive for that ideal of
Mhm.
reversibility, but there are many things that you have to do that simply are not reversible, or are reversible to a degree.
Yeah.
And in private practice, you have very little control over where this piece that you're working on is going to go, how it's going to be stored or displayed, what environmental conditions it's going to be in, how it will be subjected to direct sunlight, children throwing things. You don't know. So you have to do your best to kind of navigate the um, the standards which you have aspired to in your ideal field, and the reality of where something is going to end up, and what the expectations of the client are as well.
Yeah.
So it's a very murky thing, and it's a subject which I am constantly thinking about, and constantly, and I believe there is a sliding scale, and there has to be. And anybody who would argue that is not living in the real world.
Yeah. Mhm. It's really a case by case
It is. It
field.
often is. Yeah.
Yeah. Just give me one moment here. I'm gonna plug myself in so I don't
Okay.
lose. There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think we've covered a lot of what I sent you. Uh, I know you mentioned some of your collaborations earlier, but I thought I'd check in and see if you wanted to share more about any like collaborative projects, or especially as someone who worked in private practice, uh, like how that differs from somebody who works in a museum. Because I imagine it must be, if not I mean, I would say more difficult, but at the very least, very different to have to coordinate all your own teamwork with different experts.
I mean, the project that I mentioned before, the Liechtenstein, that was a true collaboration in that we shared all of the work.
Hmm.
And that's different from bringing in somebody with another area of expertise to do something that you can't do or aren't trained to do, which, I am more in that position now because I was married to, you know, Rube Goldberg and was able to, do everything. Um, I mean, I guess that's more in like with again with the Liechtenstein. So in New York, I don't have my support system.
Hmm.
I'm you know flying solo there. So I have another painting conservator in New York who is on the ground there. When we left and finished the project, she kept me posted, because this was the other issue with this is that this was supposed to be a temporary installation of only 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so our tests for adhesion to this big panel of this gigantic painting composed of two pieces was supposed to be reversible fairly easily after 6 weeks, but then it stayed up for 6 months. And so I had her on the ground going there regularly, looking for any detachments, making sure everything was stable. And, I made myself sick with worry because, it was very kind of like a quicksand situation. I was not in control. And then the other aspects of that project were coordinating with art handling, crating, the company that in New York that did the installation itself,
Hmm.
that built the so that we had the there's a framer in New York who is absolutely amazing, who builds all kinds of custom panels and helps with that kind of stuff. So we had him come in and build the custom panel, and then we had this other company come in and rigidify the panel so that it could be treated like an easel painting and hung on the wall. And they installed it, and that took an entire day. Um, and with my heart in my mouth the entire time.
Of course.
Um, and you cannot account for every
Hmm.
eventuality. I mean, things happen. So you've just got to think 10 steps ahead and go, what if, what if, what if, what if?
Yeah.
This panel was a multiple parts screwed together and then rigidified with metal, and it still bowed in the middle when being lifted up.
Wow.
And that still affected the painting.
Hmm.
So, you know, it's something that I would not repeat. I would not subject this painting to any more of this. This painting has to be sent to a venue where it will stay.
Yeah. Somewhere stable and lasting.
Mm-hmm. In terms of other kinds of collaboration, this is not really something that I've had to deal with uh, too much, but I have on occasion collaborated with objects conservators or textile conservators where, like in a church, there are
Hmm.
multiple types of things that have to be dealt with. But usually what happens is that because money is always the deciding factor, and money makes people ugly, is that you get that textile part of it or that objects part of it dealt with directly with the client, so that the collaboration isn't like I'm not managing them and I'm not paying them
Yeah.
because it gets too difficult.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think next, what are we mentioned a little bit about this in recent years with COVID, since COVID. But what have been like the changes in the field over the course of your time? working in it, both good. What like do you notice has shifted from when you began?
Wow. Yeah, well, I've been in private practice for 34 years, so a lot of things have changed. I'd say the most obvious change is liability paranoia.
Mm,
Is that we used to do things far more simply because people, we didn't have to have all kinds of liability insurance, and we jumped up and down off scaffolding without people freaking out. And I mean, maybe we just got lucky, but it seems to
mhm,
me that we were able to do things with far greater impunity. And obviously once something happens and somebody gets injured, then everything changes. And so all those things are good. I'm not objecting to it. It's just made life a whole lot more complicated because you have to insure yourself up the wazoo. And uh, yeah, I'm paperwork, much more paperwork than before. Again, not a bad thing, but
mhm.
um, yeah, I mean, I find that in private practice, because I am the owner, I sit behind my desk a lot.
Yeah.
And I mourn my bench work days, where I was just working on paintings all day, because I'm the one who does all of the contract writing and all of the report writing. I mean, I delegate my report writing to one of my other people, but in the end, I have to look at everything myself because it's my name on it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the downsides, I'd say, of being in private practice. Although I'm kind of small, there are other people in private practice who have, office managers, and have obviously handle this far better than I do. But
Well,
that's
still,
just the
there's
nature.
always responsibilities that come with being your own boss,
Yeah,
I would think.
yeah, yeah. I have my little studio here, which is quite comfortable. It's behind my home. That is part of my security. I don't commute unless I'm going to site projects, so that's nice in Los Angeles in particular.
Yeah.
Um, what else has changed? So much.
Mhm.
I mean, I of course just think of it in terms of business, but um, yeah, I can't think of anything right now, but lots.
Then I think coming up on like my last question for you would be, do you have any words of advice to aspiring conservators? Totally not just me.
Hands-on experience.
Yep, I've heard a lot of that.
Yeah, you need to feel things, and you need to, like, if you want to be a conservator and you don't have any experience painting or making stuff,
Hmm.
that is fine. There's plenty of people that, but you need to have that tactile experience with materials.
Yeah.
And my background is, I mean, my parents were foreign service officers, and we traipsed around the museums of Europe, and I grew up painting and making garbage, and then I like stuff. I just like stuff, and I love tools. You got to love all that stuff. I have all the tools. I feel blessed, because what could be better than tools? But yeah, you can't be afraid to bang on people's doors. All people can do is say no.
Hmm.
Um, you have to be prepared to work for nothing. It's wrong. I pay everybody that works for me, even, some sort of minimal thing. You get what you pay for, so you should pay people. But lots and lots of people take apprentices for free,
Yeah.
and sometimes that's the only way you can do it. It is a field of because of this. It's a field of wealthier people,
Hmm.
people who are capable of being supported by somebody else while they're doing this. And that's an unfortunate thing. It is. The demographics of this field are very clear.
Hmm.
Um, it's, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion on this subject of getting minorities and other people from, more disadvantaged backgrounds into conservation. But it is very difficult because you spend years either apprenticing or doing internships that are poorly paid or fellowships, and you do the rounds. And then there are only a few jobs available in museums.
Yeah.
And now I started out, here's the other sort of every pivotal moment in my history in this field when so I told you I met my husband in grad school,
Yeah.
and he wanted to understand why I was so obsessed with Italy. And he said, well, let's move there. You talk about this all the time. Let's move there. And he got a job with ICROM, which
Hmm.
is the International Center for Conservation in Rome, which is a UNESCO umbrella organization that is primarily devoted to teaching and catching people up in courses where uh, mid-career professionals. And so they offer courses in mural paintings conservation and scientific principles for conservation. They have a conservation program that
Yeah.
does the rounds in various countries in Africa. And, it's a cool
Great.
place. And so he got a job there, and I went with him for 2 years, and we lived in Rome. Um, and I went with him to do that instead of taking a job that I had been offered at the Brooklyn Museum.
Hmm.
So I sometimes play in my head that scenario where what if I had gone to work at the Brooklyn Museum instead? But I went to Rome, and he couldn't stand it after 2 years because Italy is Italy, and it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, it is a third world country in first world clothing. And it's all about who you know and who your uncle is and what pieces of paper you have to attest to your
Hmm.
accreditation. And it is a very difficult country. It's a great country to be a child in. It's wonderful to be a student. It's lovely to be a tourist, but to work there is hard
Yeah.
because things are not, you don't go from point A to point B in a straight line. There's no Euclidean geometry in Italy. It's always prima si va al bar, si prende un caffè corretto col whiskey, and then you go and you meet so and so who's going to help you do this, and
Hmm.
which can be fun, but it's also can be very frustrating. So
It's not.
after 2 years, yeah, after 2 years we left and we decided to do this, go into private practice. And so,
Well, it seems like it was the right choice for you if you're still at
oh, I love it. I love
it.
it. And that's the other thing that's great about this field. It is filled with people who are passionate.
Hmm.
It's not like you're working behind a desk for an insurance company and you can't wait for the weekend. The things that we do are endlessly interesting. I am always confronted with something I haven't quite seen before, some permutation of some weird thing. Somebody's done something strange, and I open it up and I'm like, oh, well, this is fun. I've never had to deal with that particular nuance before, and it's great. That's great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, great.
So I wish you luck in your personal endeavor, and to all other people who are going into conservation who might see this, I wish you luck as well. Persevere.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. And thank
My
you again
pleasure.
for taking the time to talk to me.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I'm gonna